This will yet appear more. Second, if we consider the party that set forth that declaration, whom the proclamation against it represents so odiously and invidiously, whom the oath imposed obliges us to condemn, being so represented, as if they were maintainers of murdering principles, and perpetrators of assassinating villainies inconsistent with peace or any good government, and thereof to be exterminated and destroyed out of the land, whom therefore they prosecute and persecute so cruelly, to the effusion of their blood under color of law. Number 1. The takers of this oath must have formally, under their unhappy hand, disowned and renounced them, and all part or interest in them, or society or sympathy with them, who yet are known to be the suffering people of God, more earnestly contending, witnessing, wrestling for the faith and word of Christ's patience, and have suffered more for their adherence to the covenanted reformation of the Church of Scotland, and for their opposition to all its deformations and defections, than any party within the land. Yet them have they rejected as their companions, though with some of them sometimes they have had sweet company and communion to the house of God, by abjuring and condemning their deed which duty and necessity have drove them to. Number 2. Hereby they have presumptuously taken unto them to pass a judgment upon the deed of their brethren before their murdering enemies, and that not a private, discretive judgment, but a public, definitive sentence in their capacity, by the most solemn way of declaring it, that can be by oath and subscription under their hand, whereby they have condemned all the sufferings of their brethren who sealed their testimony in opposition to this compliance with their blood, and finished it with honored joy, as foolish and frivolous profusion of their own blood, nay, as just and legally inflicted and executed upon them, as being rebels of murdering principles and practices. For this cannot be vindicated from a more than indirect justifying of all the murdering severity executed upon them. Thirdly, and hereby they have unkindly and unchristianly listed themselves on the other side against them, and take part rather with their enemies than with them. For thus they used to plead for it, when they pressed this oath upon them that scrupled it. When any war is declared against the king, quote, any of his majesty's soldiers may question any man whom he is for, and if he be not for the king, he may act against him as an enemy. And if they will not declare for the king and disown the rebels, they are to be reputed by all as enemies, unquote. Which, whatever weakness be in the arguing, plainly discovers that they take the abjuring of that declaration in that juncture to be a man's declaring of what side he is for, and that he is not for the emitter of that declaration, of that declaration, but for the king and his party, which, in the present state of affairs, is a most dreadful owning of Christ's enemy and disowning of his friends. Hence a disowning of the Lord's persecuted people and condemning their practice, and an owning of their persecutors and espousing their side of it, is a sinful confederacy. But the taking of this oath is such, as is evident by what is said. Therefore it is a sinful confederacy. Number 3. Considering the nature, conditions, and qualifications of so solemn and serious a piece of God's worship, and way of invocating his holy name, as an oath is, it will appear that the taking of this imposed oath of abjuration was a dreadful and heinous breach of the third command, by taking his name in vain, in the worst sort, and so cannot be holden guilty. I prove it thus. An oath which cannot be taken in truth, judgment, and righteousness is a breach of the third command. But this is an oath which cannot be taken in truth, judgment, and righteousness, which is evident for, number 1, it cannot be taken by any conscientious man in truth, in sincerity of the heart, simplicity of the mind, singleness and honesty in the intention, not putting any other sense than the imposer hath, and which is the clear sense of it, without oath and beyond it. For if he take it according to the meaning, then he should swear it unlawful ever to declare war against the king, and consequently never to rise in arms against him upon any pretense whatsoever. For if we may rise in arms for our own defense, we make and must declare a defensive war. And indeed, in themselves, as well as in their sense and meaning who impose them, these two oaths never to rise in arms against the king, and this of abjuration, are one and the same. Then also should we swear it unlawful, at any time, upon any occasion, or for any cause, to kill any such as serve the king in church, state, army, or country, either in peace or war. For that is their thought, and the sense even of the oath itself, or what is beyond it. And in part for their exemption and immunity from all condign punishment, this oath was contrived. But in fine, How can this oath be taken in truth, when it is not apparent either that the declaring of a war against the king, or killing some for some causes, which shall afterwards be made appear to be lawful, that serve him, are to be abjured and disowned, or that the declaration does assert any such thing? And indeed it will be found to be a denying the truth, and a subscribing to a manifest falsehood, invoking God to be witness thereto. Number 2. This oath cannot be taken in judgment, that is, with knowledge and deliberation, etc. All the terms of it have much of obscure ambiguity. Declaring a war and killing any who serve the king may be construed in several senses, good and bad, but here they are indefinitely expressed and universally condemned, particularly that, in so far as hath several faces, and can never be sworn in judgment, for if it denote a casualty, and signify as much as because, or wherefore, then all declarations of war against any that have the name of king whatsoever, upon whatsoever grounds, and all killing of any serving him, though in our own defense, must be universally condemned, for the consequence is good as to everything, if it import a restriction, excluding other things in the declaration, but obliging to abjure only that. Then it implies also an affirmation that these two things are contained in it, which will not appear to the judgment of them that will seriously ponder the declaration itself, if again it be a supposition or condition, and to be interpreted. For if so be, then all that the judgment can make of it is that it is uncertain, and so the conscience dare not invoke God as a witness of that which is uncertain, whether it be a truth or a lie. Thirdly, this oath could not be taken in righteousness, for the matter is not true, certainly known, lawful, possible, weighty, necessary, useful, and worthy. It is not true that the declaration imports so far as it is represented in the oath of abjuration, neither is it certainly known, but by collating these two together, the contrary will appear. Neither is it lawful, if it were true that such assertions were in it, to abjure all declarations of war against the king, and to swear it unlawful ever to kill any, if he once be in the king's service, in church, state, army, or country. Nor is it possible to reduce this assertory oath into a promissory one lawfully, as most part of such oaths may and do necessarily imply. For when I swear such a thing unlawfully, it implies my promise, by virtue of the same oath, never to practice it. But it is not possible, as the case stands, for a man to bind up himself in every case from all declared war against the king, or from killing some employed in his service. What if there be a necessary call to join in arms with the Lord's people for the defense of their religion, lives, and liberties against him? What if he commands massacre? Shall not a man defend himself, nor endeavor to kill none of that murdering crew because they are in his service? Was ever a fool so fettered? Nor is it of such weight to be the occasion of involving the whole country in perjury or persecution, as by that oath was done. Nor was it necessary in this man's time to make all abjure a declaration out of date, when the object of it, Charles II, was dead, and no visible party actually in arms to prosecute it. Nor was it ever of any use or worth, except it were implicitly to gratify their greedy lusting after the blood of innocents, or the blood of silly souls cheated by their snares, by involving them in the same sin of perjury and conscience debauching false swearing, whereof they themselves are so heinously guilty. But let them, and such as have taken that oath, and not fled to Christ for his sanctuary, lay to heart the doom of false swearers. Quote, "The flying roll of the curse of God shall enter into their house." Unquote. Zechariah 5, verse 4. Quote, "Love no false oath, for all these are things that I hate, saith the Lord." Unquote. Zechariah 8, verse 17. Quote, "The Lord will be a swift witness against false swearers." Unquote. Malachi 3, verse 5. "And let them sift their conscience before the world, and set the word to the conscience in these considerations that have some weight." Fourth, if we consider this particular oath itself, and the words of it more narrowly, we shall find a complication of iniquities in it, by examining the sense of them as the impostors expound them. Firstly, not only that declaration, but all such, in so far as they declare and assert such things, are here renounced, and hereby many and faithful declarations are disowned that declare the same things. It is indeed pleaded by some that profess to be Presbyterians, as it was also pretended by some of the pressers of the oath themselves, but in order to pervert and cheat the conscience, that here is not required a disowning of the apologetical declaration simpliciter, but only according to which, or rather of a pretended one of their supposing, in so far as it imports such things. But this is frivolous, for the pretended one is intended by the imposers to be the real apologetical declaration, which they will have to be disowned and cannot be distinguished from it. And though all these assertions cannot be fastened upon that apologetical declaration, but it is evident that it is invidiously misrepresented, yet that same is the pretended one which they require to be abjured, in so far as it asserts such things, which it does not. And if it be according to which to be disowned, then that must either be according to that assertion of killing any, etc., which is not to be found in it, and so it is not to be disowned of all, and so it is not to be disowned at all, or it must be according to the declaration of war against the king, and so that which, or formal reason of disowning it, will oblige to disown all declarations of war against the king, which cannot be disowned. Others again object that it is not required to be disowned formally, but only conditionally, taking and confounding in so far, for if so be. But to any thinking man it is plain, this cannot be a supposition nor yet a simple restriction, as they would give it out, but an assertion that such things are indeed imported in it. For so the imposers think and say, and if it must pass current under that notion as a supposition, being equivalent to, if so be, then under that sophistical pretext, I might renounce the covenant, or the most indisputed confession or declaration that ever was, in so far as it contains such things. And so this equivocation might elude all testimonies whatsoever, and justify all prevarications. Number 2. This must condemn all defensive war of subjects against their oppressing rulers, in that a declaration is abjured in so far as it declares war against the king, to press and persuade people to which it was usually urged by the imposers, that when a war is declared by rebels against the king, then all the subjects are obliged to disown the rebels, or else be repute for such themselves. And when it was alleged the war was ceased, because the object declared against was ceased, Charles II being dead, otherwise if a man be obliged to give his opinion about a war declared against a king, deceased and gone, then by the same parity of reason we must be obliged to give his opinion of that war of the lords of the congregation, as they were called, against Queen Mary in the beginning of the Reformation. It was still replied by them that the rebellion continued and all were guilty of it, that did not abjure that declaration, whence it is evident they mean that everything which they call rebellion must be disowned, and consequently all resistance of superior upon any pretense whatsoever, as many of their acts explain it. Yea, and it was plain told by some of them, to some that scrupled to take the oath, because they said they did not understand it, that the meaning was to swear never to rise in arms against the king. Against this it hath been objected by several, that this was always denied by Presbyterians, that ever they declared war against the king expressly, purposely, and designedly, but only against him by accident, when he happened to be the adverse party. But this distinction will not be a salvo to the conscience, for the object declared against is either a king or not. If he be not, then a declaration of war against him is not to be abjured. If he be king, then he is either declared against a king, and by himself, or as an oppressor or an abuser of his power. The first indeed is to be disowned, for a king, as king or lawful magistrate, must not be resisted. Romans 13, verse 2. But the second, to declare war against a king, as an oppressor and abuser of his power and subverter of the laws, hath been owned by our church and state many a time, and they have opposed and declared war as purposely against him as he did against them, and as really and formally as he was an oppressor. Sure, he cannot be an oppressor only by accident. However, this hath been owned always by many Presbyterians, that war may be declared against him who is called king, and therefore to abjure a declaration, in so far as it declares war against the king, will condemn not only that declaration, upon the heads wherein its honesty and faithfulness chiefly consists, but all other most honest and honorable declarations that have been made and emitted by our worthy and renowned ancestors, and by our worthies in our own time, who have formally, avowedly, and explicitly, or expressly, purposely, and designedly declared their opposition to tyranny and tyrants, and their lawful and laudable designs to repress, depress, and suppress them by all the ways and means that God and nature and the laws of nations allow, when they did by law itself depose and exonerate themselves from all rule or privilege or prerogative of rulers, and became no more God's ministers, but Beelzebub's vicegerents and monsters to be exterminated out of the society of mankind.